The rain was pounding so hard it drowned out her cries. Chisa stood at the doorstep, her 5-year-old daughter clutching a torn teddy bear. The porch light flickered as her father's voice echoed coldly from inside. "We've all decided, you don't live here anymore." The door slammed. Her daughter whispered, trembling, "Mommy, where do we go now?" Chisa didn't know. All she had was a backpack, a child, and the sound of her family laughing behind closed curtains. That night wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of everything they never saw coming. Chisa sat nervously at the edge of the sofa, clutching her hands together, hoping this family meeting would bring some good news. She had lost her job a few weeks ago and had been struggling to find a new one. Maybe, she thought, her family wanted to help her plan her next steps. But when her father cleared his throat and looked at her with cold eyes, her hope started to fade. He said they had talked it over and decided it was time for her to grow up and stop depending on them. His tone wasn't angry, it was worse. It was empty. Her mother avoided her eyes, pretending to fix her scarf. Then her younger sister, Vanya, leaned back and crossed her arms, rolling her eyes. "We're not your babysitters, Chisa," she said, her voice dripping with pride. Chisa blinked, confused. "I just needed a little more time," she whispered. "I'm looking for work. I'll pay back everything, I promise." But her father only sighed, like he had already decided long before this moment. "You've been saying that for months," he said. "We're tired, Chisa. We're tired of carrying you and that child. You and your daughter don't belong here anymore." Those words hit harder than any slap. For a second she couldn't breathe. Her daughter? Their granddaughter? How could he say that? Her heart pounded in her chest as she turned to her mother for mercy. But her mother just looked down at her hands, silent, as if silence would make her less cruel. Chisa fell to her knees, begging them to let her stay a little longer, just until she could find something. She reminded them of all the years she had helped with the bills when she still had her job. But they didn't care. Even little Vanya smirked, as if she enjoyed watching her sister beg. The same sister who once helped her with schoolwork now sat there cold and distant. When Chisa finally realized they wouldn't change their minds, she stood up slowly, her body trembling. "Fine," she said softly, tears streaming down her face. "But one day you'll remember this night." Her father looked away, pretending not to hear her. As she walked out with her daughter's small hand in hers, she heard them talking again, not about her, but about dinner plans. That moment broke something inside her. She left the house not just jobless, but heartless, carrying nothing but her child and the heavy truth that family can sometimes be the first to shut the door. That night, the city felt colder than ever. Chisa walked aimlessly through the dark streets, holding her little girl's hand tightly. The rain fell harder with every step, soaking their clothes and their only bag of belongings. Every house they passed had warm lights glowing through the windows, but none of those doors were open for them. By midnight, they found an old bridge that offered a little shelter. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. Chisa spread her coat on the ground and wrapped her daughter inside it, pulling her close to keep her warm. The wind whistled through the cracks, and water dripped from the bridge above. Her daughter looked up at her with sleepy eyes and asked in a soft, trembling voice, "Mommy, is this a game?" Chisa felt her throat tighten, but she forced a small smile. "Yes, baby," she whispered, brushing her fingers through her daughter's wet hair. "Just a game. We're camping tonight." Her daughter smiled faintly and closed her eyes, holding her torn teddy bear against her chest. Chisa watched her for a long time, her own stomach aching with hunger. She hadn't eaten since morning, but she pretended to be fine. She couldn't let her little girl see her cry. The sound of cars above them mixed with the beating rain, making her feel smaller than ever. When dawn finally began to break, the rain slowed to a drizzle. Chisa looked at her daughter's tiny face, pale, innocent, trusting, and her heart broke all over again. She had no money, no food, and no one left to turn to. Just then, an old man in an orange vest appeared. He was a street cleaner, sweeping near the bridge. When he saw them, he stopped, shocked. "You've been here all night?" he asked. Chisa nodded silently, embarrassed. The man didn't say much. He reached into his lunch bag and handed her 2 pieces of bread and a small bottle of water. "It's not much," he said gently, "but please take it." Chisa wanted to refuse, but her daughter had already woken up, staring hungrily at the bread. Tears filled Chisa's eyes as she accepted it with shaky hands. "Thank you," she whispered. As her daughter ate, Chisa looked up at the gray morning sky. That small act of kindness, from a stranger who had little himself, lit something deep inside her. She realized she couldn't give up. That bridge wasn't her ending. It was the place where she decided she would rise again. When morning came, Chisa's eyes burned from staying awake all night. Her daughter was still asleep, curled up under the bridge. The world around them was quiet, but Chisa's mind was full of noise, fear, shame, and the desperate question of where to go next. She knew she couldn't let her little girl wake up to another day in the cold. Gathering her strength, she lifted her daughter in her arms and began to walk. Her legs felt heavy, her shoes soaked, but she kept moving. After a few hours, she saw a small building with a faded sign that read Women's Shelter. All are welcome. For a moment, she just stood there, unsure if she should enter. But then her daughter tugged her sleeve and said, "Mommy, I'm hungry." That was all she needed to hear. She pushed open the door. Inside, the warmth hit her face, and she almost cried from relief. A woman with kind eyes and short curly hair walked toward her. "You're safe here," the woman said softly. "I'm Nair." She gave Chisa a blanket and a cup of warm tea, then guided her to a small room where she and her daughter could rest. For the first time in days, Chisa felt the weight on her chest lighten just a little. Later that afternoon, Nair sat beside her and asked gently about her story. Chisa told her everything: losing her job, her family's rejection, the night under the bridge. Nair listened without interrupting, her eyes filled with understanding. When Chisa finished, Nair placed a hand on hers and said, "You have more strength than you realize. You just need to remember who you are." Those words sank deep into Chisa's heart. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about them. Maybe she wasn't as weak as she felt. Maybe there was still something left inside her, something worth fighting for. The next day, she started helping in the kitchen, washing dishes and serving meals. It wasn't much, but it gave her purpose. She also joined small workshops the shelter offered, lessons on confidence, budgeting, and skills training. When someone handed her a pencil and paper during a creative activity, she found herself sketching again. It had been years since she last drew designs, but her hands remembered what her mind had forgotten. Nair noticed her talent and smiled. "You have a gift," she said. For the first time in a long while, Chisa smiled too. The woman who once slept under a bridge was slowly finding herself again. One small step, one sketch, one act of courage at a time. Weeks passed, and life at the shelter began to feel like a new beginning for Chisa. Every morning, she helped in the kitchen, then spent time in the small art room that the shelter used for craft projects. It was filled with scraps of fabric, paint, and brushes donated by kind people. One afternoon, while others made simple crafts to sell at the upcoming shelter fair, Chisa sat quietly, lost in thought. She picked up a plain canvas tote bag and a small brush. Without thinking too much, she began to paint. Her hands moved softly, painting bright patterns and faces inspired by her memories. Her grandmother's colorful dresses, the markets she used to visit as a child, and the dream she once had of being a designer. When she finished, she didn't expect much. But when Nair saw the bag, she gasped. "Chisa, this is beautiful," she said. "You should make more for the fair." At first, Chisa was shy. She thought no one would care about her art, but Nair kept encouraging her, so she stayed up late every night painting more bags, each one different from the last. She used colors that told her story: deep blues for the sadness she had felt, and bright yellows for the hope that had slowly returned. When the day of the craft fair arrived, Chisa set up a small table with her hand-painted bags. Her daughter sat beside her, smiling proudly. People passed by, admiring the designs. Some stopped to ask questions. Soon a few bought one, then another, and then more. Within an hour, her table was almost empty. A woman dressed elegantly approached her booth. She introduced herself as the owner of a local boutique. "Did you make these yourself?" she asked, examining a bag closely. When Chisa nodded, the woman smiled and said, "I'll take 20. I want to sell them in my shop." Chisa was speechless. She had gone from painting quietly in a shelter to receiving her first big order. She hugged her daughter tightly, tears filling her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. That evening, Nair sat beside her, smiling with pride. "You see," she said, "your heart spoke through your art." Inspired by those words, Chisa decided to give her work a name. He called it Moyo, which meant heart in her language. Every design she made carried a piece of her. Her pain, her hope, her courage. From that day, Moya wasn't just a name. It was a promise that she would never let her struggles define her again. One sunny afternoon, Chisa was arranging her tote bags at the small market near the shelter. Her daughter sat beside her, drawing little hearts on scrap paper while Chisa smiled at customers who stopped to look. Business had been growing slowly, and she was grateful for every sale. That day, a woman with a camera around her neck stopped by her table. She was a tourist from another country, fascinated by Chisa's work. She picked up one of the bags, turning it over in her hands. "Did you make this yourself?" she asked, her eyes wide. Chisa nodded shyly. "Yes, ma'am. I paint all of them by hand." The woman smiled warmly. "They're beautiful. There's so much emotion in them." She bought 2 bags and asked if she could take a photo. Chisa hesitated but agreed, holding one of her bags with a quiet smile while her daughter hugged her leg. The woman thanked her and promised, "I'll tell people about your work." Chisa didn't think much of it. She packed up that evening, tired but happy she had sold a few bags. But the next morning, something unexpected happened. When she woke up, her phone was full of messages and missed calls. The tourist's photo and story had gone viral online. The post was titled, "A Homeless Mother Creating Magic with Her Hands." Thousands of people were sharing it, leaving comments like, "She's an inspiration," and "Where can I buy her bags?" Chisa couldn't believe it. She showed the screen to Nair, shaking with excitement and disbelief. Within hours, orders started pouring in from all over. Not just from her city, but from other countries too. People wanted to support her, to own a piece of her story through her art. She worked day and night, painting each bag with even more care, remembering every hardship that led her here. That night, when her daughter fell asleep beside her, Chisa sat quietly, tears rolling down her cheeks. She thought about that night under the bridge, the rain, the hunger, the pain of being unwanted. And now, the same hands that once begged for shelter were creating something people around the world admired. With the money from her sales, Chisa rented a small, clean room, their first real home in months. When she turned the key in the door, she hugged her daughter tightly and whispered, "We'll never sleep outside again." For the first time in a long time, she believed it. Months passed, and life had completely changed for Chisa. Her small shop, filled with colorful tote bags and handmade crafts, was always buzzing with customers. Her brand Moyo had become popular, and even small boutiques across the city wanted her designs. Every morning, she opened her shop with her daughter beside her, feeling proud of how far they had come. She had built all this from nothing, from tears, pain, and courage. One afternoon, while arranging new stock near the window, she heard the bell at the door. When she turned around, her heart skipped a beat. Standing there, dressed in expensive clothes and holding a designer purse, was her younger sister, Vanya. The same sister who had smirked the night their father threw her out. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Vanya smiled, but Chisa could tell it wasn't real. It was the same kind of smile people wear when they want something. "Wow, big sister," Vanya said, pretending to sound impressed. "You've really made quite a name for yourself. The shop looks nice." Chisa wiped her hands on her apron and replied quietly, "Thank you. What brings you here?" Vanya looked around, avoiding her eyes. "Oh, she said casually. "Dad's been talking about you. He says maybe it's time we all reunite again, as a family." That one word, maybe, hit Chisa harder than she expected. The same people who threw her out in the rain were now talking about reuniting. She looked at her sister, wondering if she truly believed she could erase the past so easily. Vanya continued talking, pretending everything was fine. She mentioned how their parents' business was struggling, how things had been hard for them lately, and how it would mean a lot if Chisa could visit or maybe even help out a little. Chisa listened quietly, her expression calm. Inside, she felt a storm of emotions, hurt, anger, disbelief. But she didn't let any of it show. Instead, she smiled softly and said, "It's nice to know you remember me now." Vanya shifted uncomfortably, realizing her act wasn't working. After a few awkward minutes, she left saying, "I'll tell Dad you said hi." When the door closed, Chisa stood there for a moment, staring at the space her sister had just left. She didn't feel angry anymore. She felt powerful. The same family that once threw her away now wanted her back. but she had built her own world, one that didn't depend on their approval. A week later, Chisa received a message from her sister, Vanya. It was short and polite. Dad wants you to come for dinner. We'd like to see you again. Chisa stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to feel. Part of her wanted to ignore it, but another part of her, the part that still remembered being that desperate, broken woman, wanted closure. So after thinking for a few days, she decided to go. When she arrived at her parents' house, everything looked the same, yet different. The gate she once walked out of in tears now stood wide open for her. As she entered, her mother rushed forward with an overexcited smile. "Oh, Chisa, look at you," she said, hugging her tightly as if nothing had ever happened. Her father followed, clapping her on the shoulder. "Our successful daughter," he said proudly. The same man who once told her she didn't belong there was now bragging about her. They led her to the dining table, the same one, where they had voted to throw her out years ago. Chisa sat quietly, her daughter beside her, while her family acted as if everything was perfect. They asked about her business, her shop, the award she had won. They laughed loudly, passing food, pretending to be loving and proud. But beneath the smiles, Chisa could sense the truth. There was tension in their eyes, a hunger not for love, but for what she had achieved. Then, as plates were cleared and tea was poured, her father leaned back and said in a gentle tone, "You've done so well for yourself, Chisa. Maybe now you could help the family business a little. Just a small investment to keep things running." The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Everyone stopped talking. Chisa slowly placed her cup down and looked around the table. She saw the same faces that once looked at her with disgust, the same eyes that had watched her walk into the rain. Her voice was calm but sharp when she finally spoke. "Was I your daughter when you left me outside that night?" she asked softly. The room fell silent. Her father froze. Her mother looked down ashamed. Even Vanya had no words. The silence was colder than the rain that had soaked her years ago. Chisa stood up, her dignity glowing brighter than ever. "You don't get to choose when to love me," she said quietly. "Family doesn't work like that." Then she took her daughter's hand and walked out, this time not in tears, but in peace. A few weeks after that dinner, Chisa was at her shop when a young reporter walked in holding a notebook. He introduced himself as Lonnie, a journalist who had been following her journey since her story went viral months ago. He spoke softly, with genuine respect in his voice. "Chisa," he said, "people know your brand but not the full story behind it. Would you allow me to tell it? Everything, from what happened to how you rose again." Chisa froze for a moment. The idea of sharing her past, the pain, the rejection, the night under the bridge made her heart race. She had built a new life, and part of her wanted to keep the old wounds hidden. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered. Lonnie nodded understandingly. "When you are," he said, "the world deserves to hear the truth, from you, not from rumors." That night, Chisa couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about her daughter, about how one day she would grow up and hear parts of her mother's story from strangers. Maybe it was better if she told it herself, honestly, bravely, completely. The next morning, she called Lonnie and said simply, "Let's do it." They met several times over the next few weeks. Chisa told him everything. The night her family voted her out, sleeping under the bridge, meeting Nair, rediscovering her talent, and building Moyo from scratch. There were moments she cried during the interviews, but she didn't hide it. "I want people to know," she told him, "that even when everyone turns away, you can still rise if you refuse to give up." When the article was finally published, it was titled "Thrown Away But Not Broken: The Story of Chisa and Moyo." Within hours, it spread across social media. Thousands of people shared it, tagging her and writing messages like, "Her strength gives me hope, and this is what true resilience looks like." Chisa read every comment with tears in her eyes. The story that once brought her shame was now inspiring people everywhere. Women who had been abandoned, mothers who had lost everything, and even young people trying to rebuild their lives. She wasn't just an artist anymore. She had become a symbol of survival. Later that week, Lonnie called her and said, "Your story is changing lives, Chisa." She smiled softly and replied, "It's not just my story. It's every woman who's been left in the rain and still chose to stand up again." When Chisa's story went viral, the internet didn't just celebrate her. It started asking questions about the people who had thrown her out. Commenters began digging. through old photos connecting dots, and soon everyone knew who her family was. Screenshots of their past posts showing luxury dinners and vacations started circulating with harsh captions like, "They had everything but no heart." Her family's bakery, once the pride of their town, quickly became a target. Customers stopped coming. People boycotted them, saying they couldn't support a family that abandoned their own blood. Negative reviews flooded their page, and suppliers pulled out of deals. Within months, the bakery's windows were shuttered, and the family who once looked down on Chisa was suddenly struggling to survive. Meanwhile, Chisa's brand Moyo was blooming. What started as a small table of handmade crafts had become an international name. Orders poured in from across the world, and magazines called her the woman who rose from the rain. But Chisa didn't stop there. She wanted her success to mean something deeper. She started a project that hired single mothers, widows, and women who had been abandoned, just like her. "If no one will give them a chance," she said, "I will." Her workshop turned into a safe space filled with laughter, hope, and healing. Every woman there had a story of rejection, pain, or loss. But under Chisa's guidance, they were turning those stories into strength. Together, they crafted not only beautiful products but also new lives. The name Moyo, meaning heart, became more than a brand. It became a movement. Chisa then used part of her earnings to build small homes for women who had nowhere to go. She called them rain havens, because they were meant for those left in the rain, just like she once was. Each house had her logo carved into the wall and a simple quote beneath it: "You are not broken, you are becoming." When reporters asked about her family, Chisa only smiled. "They taught me something," she said softly. "That love without compassion is empty. I hope they find their peace, just like I found mine." As her family's world collapsed, Chisa's rose higher than ever. She didn't need revenge. Her success told the story for her. And in every woman she helped stand again, she saw a reflection of herself, strong, unshaken, and finally free. Years later, the hall glowed with golden lights as Chisa walked up to the stage in a simple but elegant dress. The crowd rose to their feet, clapping for the woman who had once been left with nothing but her child and a bag of handmade dreams. Cameras flashed as her name was called, Humanitarian of the Year. She took the microphone with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the sea of faces before her. For a moment, she remembered that dark, rainy night, the sound of thunder, her daughter's soft cry, the cold pavement beneath her feet. It felt like a lifetime ago. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but filled with emotion. "The night my family threw me out," she began, "I thought my story was over. I thought I had lost everything. But now I understand. That night, I didn't lose a home. I found myself." The audience went silent, listening to every word as if holding their breath. "Sometimes," she continued, "life breaks you only to show you what you're made of. I stand here today not because I was lucky, but because I refused to stay broken. Every woman out there who feels forgotten, this light is for you." As the crowd erupted into applause, a small figure ran toward her from backstage, her daughter, now a bright young girl, holding a tiny, worn-out teddy bear. The same one she had clutched years ago under that bridge in the rain. Chisa knelt down, tears streaming freely, and hugged her tightly. The audience melted at the sight. The camera zoomed in on the teddy bear, now a symbol of everything she had survived: pain, rejection, loneliness, and triumph. Reporters captured the moment that would soon go viral worldwide, with headlines calling it the full circle of hope. As Chisa stood again, she lifted her daughters and high. The lights above them sparkled, and she smiled through her tears. She had once been left outside in the cold, unwanted and unseen. But now, she stood at the center of warmth, applause, and love, not because she sought revenge, but because she chose resilience. She didn't just rebuild her life, she became the light others looked toward when theirs went dark. And in that moment, surrounded by hope, applause, and her little girl's smile, Chisa knew the rain that once drowned her had only helped her grow.